Hi Chefeteers, I'm Chef Nakia and I want you to be more confident in the kitchen and I want you to be really confident when you are cooking rice. Rice is such a great staple dish. It works so well as a starch to round out your meal. And when you look at it, rice is used in a lot of different cuisines throughout the world. From paella to risotto to biryani to pilaf, fried rice, or plof. There are so many different dishes that use rice. And it's so delicious. And once you are familiar with it, it's really easy to prepare. In today's video, we're going to go over the general guidelines for cooking rice, along with a few specific things to keep in mind for 5 different specific types of rice. Thai jasmine rice, brown rice, long grain white rice, basmati rice, and arborio rice for risotto. We're also going to talk about some adjustments you might need to make for high altitude. And another great thing about rice is it makes for great leftovers, and there are so many different versatile ways that you can eat up that leftover rice. So I'll also share with you my favorite ways to reheat rice and a few meal ideas for how you can use up leftover rice. So if you are someone who has ever struggled with undercooking rice or getting sticky or mushy rice when you did not want sticky rice, or if you just want a few new meal ideas, then stick around because this video is for you. The first thing that we need to talk about is choosing the right rice for your desired dish. Short grain rice is going to be starchier, and long grain rice will have less starch, so it will create less sticky rice in general. So your sushi rice and your arborio rice, like for risotto, you want that to be on the stickier side. So those are short grain rices. Also, if you're doing like a rice pudding, you're gonna want to lean for a shorter grain rice. And then a lot of rice side dishes like paella or just, basmati rice on its own as a side, those are long grain rices and they are less starchy. Fun fact, rice is the seed of a semi-aquatic grass and it is considered a grain. And whenever somebody is talking about plate composition, they will say, add the rice as either a starch or a grain to the plate. And you will hear me say starch a lot in this video. And the way that I am using it for the most part is kind of in how we want to avoid too much starchiness. So the rice is considered like a starch component of your plate, but we're going to talk about rinsing your rice to get rid of excess starch. And it's not getting rid of all of it, it's still a starch, but it is just reducing the excess starch that is on the outside of the grain to avoid really sticky rice. So that leads us perfectly to our next point of do you want to rinse your rice? You are going to rinse the majority of rice. If you are cooking your rice for a side dish where you don't want sticky rice, it's pretty much, unless you're making sushi, like sushi rice, risotto, bread pudding, or a specific dish where you really want a thick binding rice. If you don't want that, then you're gonna want to rinse your rice. So like paella and most of your just like side dish rice, your basmati rice, rinse all of those because you want as little starch on the outside of that rice granule as possible. And the way you're going to rinse it is under cold water. It's important that it's cold water, and you can put it in a fine mesh strainer or a chinois or a sieve of some kind. And while you do want to move the rice around a little bit to ensure that it's evenly rinsed, you don't want to move it around too much because it will kind of flake off more of the exterior, and you will just be rinsing and rinsing and rinsing and rinsing forever. So have the cold water running over your rice and move it every once in a while and rinse it until the water runs clear out of your sieve. And some people will ask, okay, what about soaking rice? Well, whether you soak the rice or not is not going to have a big impact on the amount of starch on the outside and how sticky your rice will be. Some people choose to soak rice to cut down on the cooking time, though it really won't cut down on it that long. And you're going to want to soak your rice for at least 30 minutes before you start cooking it. So I never soak my rice. To me, it feels like an unnecessary added step. And the 30 minutes of time taken to soak the rice doesn't make sense for saving like 3 to 5 minutes on cooking the rice. For jasmine rice and basmati rice, soaking the rice can make the finished rice a little bit more fragrant, more aromatic. Personally, I think that rice smells good and is plenty aromatic to begin with, but if that is something that you're really focusing on, then you can try soaking your rice at least 30 minutes and then cooking it and see if you notice a difference. So we've talked about rinsing and soaking, and now it's time to talk about actually cooking the rice. Let's turn on the heat. So whenever we are cooking rice at high altitude, pretty much everything I'm going to say here, we're going to want to increase the quantities of water or chicken stock or whatever moisture you're cooking the rice in. Increase it by about 10%, and then we're also going to need to increase the cooking time by a few minutes. And later in the video, I'm going to get more detailed into cooking times with rice. But for now, let's talk about the ratio of liquid to rice. When you Google this, you are going to see a wide variety of ratios out there, and not necessarily a ton of explanation as to why. So I want to let you know why there is such a wide range out there. Different traditional dishes and traditional ways of cooking rice are going to lend themselves to slightly different water to rice ratios. So based on where you are in the world, you may hear advice that's a little bit different just because of customs within food that have been passed down through the generations. Now, in general, the short grain rice is going to have a closer to even water or liquid to rice ratio than long grain rice. So for short grain rice, for 1 cup of rice, you're going to use 1 to 1.5 cups of liquid. For your long grain rice, you're going to use more like 1.5 to 1 3/4 cups of liquid for 1 cup of rice. And then for brown rice or wild rice, which, another fun fact, wild rice isn't actually rice. Wild rice is actually aquatic grass. So we talked about how rice is the seed of a semi-aquatic grass, but wild rice, a little bit of a misnomer, but for it you will want to use more water, similarly to brown rice. Brown rice also uses more water, from like 2 cups of water liquid to 2.5 cups of liquid for 1 cup of rice. And remember, within those ranges, if you are at high altitude, you are going to want to use the larger of those ranges. And there is an aspect of trial and error with this. The more often you cook specific types of rice on your stove with your specific pots and pans, the more that you'll realize exactly, where your conditions in your home are going to fall within these ranges of water to rice ratios. So my preferred method of cooking rice is using the absorption method. This is where you will heat up your liquid and then you add your rice and bring it to a boil, and once it comes to a boil, you will reduce the heat down to a simmer and cover it with a lid. And then you allow that to simmer and steam the rice, and whenever all of the water is gone, then your rice should be ready. So you know how when you cook pasta, you can fill the pot with as much water as you want and boil it, and then you just drain the pasta off later. Well, I like the absorption method for rice, and that's why those ratios are important, because you don't want to have any water left over at the end. And if you are using the absorption method and you find that your rice is too mushy, that means that you have put too much water in. So you're going to want to reduce the amount of liquid that you use the next time that you cook your rice. If you find that your rice is crunchy, then you haven't used enough liquid. So add some more liquid the next time you cook your rice. Now, adding a little bit of complexity to the absorption method, though not much, I promise. I almost hesitate to even call it a more complex option. But if you want to add some additional flavor to your rice, my favorite way of doing that is to saute garlic and onion, and you can saute that in either like olive oil, avocado oil, sesame oil, or you can render the fat off of some bacon or pancetta or something like that. Bacon is probably my favorite. So I dice my bacon strips, uncooked bacon, put that in the pan, and start it off on low heat. That way you're rendering the fat out of the bacon. Once your pan is nicely coated in that rendered fat, then you can increase the heat a little bit more, add your diced onions and garlic, and saute those until they get nice and golden brown. Now, if you don't use bacon, if you want to use olive oil or avocado oil, then heat up that oil and then add in your garlic and onions. Cook those till they're caramelized or aromatic. That's kind of a preference for you. Like, do you want them, how cooked do you want them? But at the very least, let them get aromatic. And then you're going to add your rinsed rice, make sure it has been rinsed, into that pan and toast the rice in that delicious garlic and onion oil. Now, you will see in your rice granules that they will subtly change color, and you'll also be able to smell a little bit of like an aromatic change. And you don't need to toast the rice in the oil for very long, about 2 minutes. But this does bring out a little bit of a nuttier flavor to the rice, which I think is really yummy. So once the rice is toasted, then you're gonna add your liquid in, bring it up to a boil, and from there it just follows the same process as the traditional absorption method. You let it boil, you reduce the heat to a simmer, you add that lid on top, and you allow it to cook until all of the water has evaporated. 2 very important points as we're talking about cooking. Once you put the lid on, do not take it off and check the rice every couple minutes. When you do that, you are losing a lot of steam and heat. So keep that lid on as long as the rice needs to cook. And do not stir your rice. Once the liquid and the rice are together, don't stir it. So in that flavor adding method I was talking about, you can stir the rice in the oil, but once you add that stock and it's coming up to a boil, don't stir the rice, because that agitates the starch. It makes the starch want to absorb more moisture, and that is what is going to make your rice stickier. So it's very important with rice like basmati, Thai jasmine rice, brown rice, rice that you don't want it to be sticky. It's very important that you do not stir it. All right, and I kind of have avoided talking about cooking time a little bit here because it is it's very dependent on what exactly you're doing. So I'll tell like 20-ish minutes. I'll say 20-ish minutes, but brown rice and wild rice are gonna take longer than that to cook. If you are at high altitude, it's going to take longer to cook. Very briefly, I'm just going to remind you that is because the higher in altitude you go, the less atmospheric pressure we have. Therefore, the lower the temperature your water will boil at. So instead of at sea level, water boils at 212 degrees, and at a mile above sea level, water will boil closer to like 205 degrees. So that's a 7-degree difference. And that means that from sea level to high altitude, you have 7 degrees less of heat being transferred from the water into the rice, because that 7 degrees does not exist up here at high altitude. I mean, it does, but your water is already boiling. And so there's less heat transfer. So that's why things typically take a little bit longer to cook at high altitude, is because the boiling point of water is a cooler temperature. So when I say 20 minutes, 20-ish minutes, high altitude, add a little bit more time. Brown rice, wild rice, add a little bit more time. And then depending on what specific dish you are making, adjust your time. For example, risotto is a short grain rice, but it's gonna take typically longer than 20 minutes to cook, because the way that you cook arborio rice for risotto is very different than this classic absorption method that I just taught about. With risotto, you are going to start with like toasting your rice a little bit, but while that's happening, you have chicken stock or veggie stock, your liquid simmering on the stove, and so you add a ladle to your rice at a time as you are stirring, and that like promotes the starch granules to absorb more moisture and get a little bit sticky, and in the end that's what creates that nice luxurious texture with your risotto. So for risotto, you are constantly stirring, adding a little bit of stock, stirring, letting it cook down, letting the rice absorb some of that liquid, getting that starch going, and you're adding a little bit more liquid and stirring. So depending on what type of dish you're making, your rice is going to cook longer, typically longer, maybe a little bit shorter, but it's gonna be hard to get it like much shorter than like 17, 18 minutes. And there are some dishes, one example is like bibimbap, where you are going to cook the rice and then you are going to kind of cook it a second time. Now your rice, the texture of the rice, everything is going to be good to go after that first cook, but then you transfer it into your cast iron dish and put it in the oven so that the edges of the rice get a little bit crunchy, you know, that like kind of crust to it. So typically when you are cooking rice, even if there are 2 steps to cooking it, most of the time that first step is going to cook it thoroughly, and then that second step is more just combining it with whatever ingredients are there or developing some sort of additional texture on like the outside. I hope that made sense. And like I said, because rice is used in so many different dishes across the world, there are endless ways to experiment with cooking, like to experiment with rice and so many different rice dishes. So I briefly mentioned it. I'm just gonna mention it again here so that I can like probably bookmark this part of the video or cut it for a clip or something. But the 3 most common issues when you're cooking rice is my rice is sticky and I didn't want it to be. My rice is mushy and or overcooked. My rice is crunchy and or undercooked. So if you have sticky rice and you didn't want sticky rice, the next time you make rice, see if you can choose a longer grain rice. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. Rinse that rice well. Make sure you rinse it well until the water runs clean. And then do not stir that rice. Leave the cover on the pot when you're making it on the stovetop and do not stir it. If you have a rice cooker at home, you'll notice that you kind of seal it up and you don't touch it, right? So even if you don't have a rice cooker at home, if you're making it on the stovetop, pretend like it is a rice cooker that you can't get into. If your rice is mushy or overcooked, or there's liquid left in the pot after you think it's done cooking, then next time use less water. And then if your rice is crunchy, if it's not cooked all the way through, but you've run out of water, if you catch it right away, you can put a little bit more water in and put it back on the stove and cross your fingers. It's probably not going to be the absolute best texture, but you can probably get away with it. But the next time, add more rice at the beginning. And if it is crunchier on the outside because it burned at the bottom, use a timer so that you don't accidentally let the heat go for too long and like burn that bottom layer of rice on your pot. So now let's talk about leftovers. So storing leftovers and reheating leftovers. Now, once rice is cooked, it is a potentially hazardous food, which means that it should not stay out in the temperature danger zone for longer than 2 hours. Temperature danger zone is from 40 degrees Fahrenheit to 140 degrees Fahrenheit. This is the temperature where typically most of our homes are set somewhere in here, probably around 70, 75. But it is the temperature zone when bacteria, yeast, and mold are the happiest. They are going to survive and reproduce at the fastest rate, and this can lead to foodborne illness. So once your rice is cooked, you're going to want to cool it down and get it in the refrigerator, and be sure to store it in a sealed container of some kind, whether that is like a food storage container or a container with like a beeswax wrap or plastic wrap on it, or like a resealable bag. But you want to prevent a lot of air getting in and out of there because it will dry out your rice. And as we talked about with cooking, you don't want to stir the rice as you are, moving your rice from the pot or pan into the food storage container, whatnot. You want to try to avoid mashing it. Be as gentle as you can with it within reason. And then if you do decide to put it in a bag or something, if you set heavy stuff on top of it, it's gonna mush your rice into a paste. So just be aware of that as you are storing it. Now, when you reheat your rice, there are a few different methods you can use. My favorite for just 1 or 2 people eating at a time is to reheat it on the stove again. Put your rice into a saucepan and sprinkle some water or chicken stock, veggie stock, whatever, on it, and put it over low heat and put a lid on it. That is going to allow that liquid to steam up, and you're going to get a little bit more even reheating of the rice, and it will not dry out the same as it would if you just put it on the stove without a lid and without any extra moisture. And then if you would prefer to not dirty up another dish and you would rather just heat it up in the microwave, go ahead and sprinkle a little bit of water on that rice and then put a damp paper towel on top of the dish that you are heating the rice up in, and then reheat it 30 seconds at a time until it reaches your desired heat level. Now that damp paper towel is kind of doing something similar to what the lid on the stovetop is doing. It's helping to trap a little bit more of the steam so that your rice gets heated a little bit more evenly and without drying out. Now, if you are reheating a large amount of rice for, extended family, maybe there's 12 people coming over and you're reheating rice, that's when I would do it in the oven. So grab a decent sized casserole type dish. Again, sprinkle it with water or chicken stock. Water really is going to be the easiest though. So get a little bit of water in there, and then cover your pan with aluminum foil to help keep that moisture in and that steam in, and then reheat it in the oven at a relatively low temperature, 325 degrees or so. Now the stovetop method should take 5 to 10 minutes depending on the quantity that you are reheating. The oven method, yes, it will depend on the quantity. Again, that might take more 15-20 minutes. but that is also a better option for if you want to keep the rice warmer for longer, because you could turn the oven off but leave the rice in there. Maybe people are like arriving at your house and then you're gonna pull it out to eat later. And now for meal ideas for how to use up your leftover rice. Well, of course, the dishes that I mentioned at the beginning of the video, like paella and bibimbap and plov and biryani, pilaf, like those are all dishes that you could potentially like use your leftover rice to create those dishes. Fried rice is one of my favorite ways to use up leftovers rice and a bunch of different veggies, and you can even put like rotisserie chicken or leftover fish, especially salmon. Like fried rice is to me like a catch-all meal where you can make it so many different ways with so many different components, and it's always really yummy. A great thing about fried rice is because you are adding the egg and the soy sauce, your rice gets reheated with some additional moisture in there, and then the texture of the egg becomes an important part of the texture of the overall dish. And so sometimes with reheating leftover rice, it could get a little starchy, a little sticky, and fried rice kind of hides that really well. You can also make rice pudding out of leftover rice, as long as that leftover rice does not have strong, fragrant seasonings from the original time you made it. So if you want to make a sweet rice pudding, make sure that that rice was not sauteed in garlic and onion and it got some like curry seasoning or turmeric or anything that you wouldn't already want in like a sweet dish. Stir fries are another great way to use up rice. Also, filling in burritos. I love rice in burritos. I think it's a great way to fill out that burrito, and it kind of helps keep everything else in the burrito in place a little bit better. Sometimes I struggle with losing like half of my burrito because things just start falling out. So the rice can kind of bind that stuff and keep it in a nice burrito like that. You can also do like a breakfast bowl with rice on the bottom, and then you can kind of almost make like scrambled eggs and then put it on rice, and like there's a delicious filling breakfast for you right there. Making stuffed peppers is another great way to use up rice, and it's kind of like the fried rice method where the other ingredients that you're mixing it in is going to be very forgiving for whatever textural changes might happen. And for lunch, I think that there are a lot of great ways to use up leftover rice in lunch meal prep. Whether that is kind of like the burrito idea, so you already have it mixed into something, or if you have more like bento box style lunch where it's a side and then you pair it with a couple other items. And you could also make it as a bowl with rice on the bottom and then some stuff on top and microwave it all right before you eat it. And for that, I will say, if you like sauce, if you like very saucy things and you have a sauce that will pair well with it, I would highly recommend that you drizzle a sauce on top of that before you microwave it, and that sauce is going to help create that steam and reheat that rice really nicely. And the last one I'm going to mention is arancini, or any arancini style like rice nuggets that are fried or even baked. So you can take, that leftover risotto, or you could use another type of rice, and when you're reheating this rice, go ahead and stir it to activate some of that starch and make it a little bit starchy. And then you're going to mix it with cheese or other ingredients that you like, form it into balls, and then fry those. And this is a great like appetizer or snack, or it could be part of a meal. So you could take those arancini bites and pair them with a salad or a lamb pita or on top of pasta. Those in and of themselves could be used in so many different ways. And because it's mixed and then fried and everything, The texture is going to be so different from what you would expect from like a side dish of rice that you are not going to be upset at all about the reheating of the rice. So what do you think? What are some of your favorite rice dishes to make? Do you have family, like passed down through the generations, family recipes where rice is the main star that you love to cook, or that brings you a really nostalgic type feeling every time you have? What are your favorite rice leftover dishes to make? And what questions do you have about cooking rice that I didn't cover? Let me know in the comments below. And if you are somebody who is always looking for new and unique recipe ideas, head on over to Chefit's website, Chefit Shop website. I have a digital cookbook that I'm always adding more recipes to. The research and development that I get to do in writing my own recipes is one of my favorite parts of owning this business. So I'm always adding new recipes. Go check out the cookbook for your meal ideas. If you want to subscribe to Chefit's Table, then you get unlimited full access to the entire cookbook. You can download PDF versions of all of the recipes. And I'm also working to get recipe videos up on Chefit's Table. Check those out and then come back here and let me know what you think looks the most delicious and what you are excited to try cooking this week. Thank you, Chefiteers, for watching, and I hope that you have the opportunity to cook some delicious rice dishes this week. I know I'm getting really hungry and really wanting to cook some rice here soon, so I will let you all go. Have a great rest of your week, and I will see you next Wednesday, putting up videos every other Wednesday. Thank you, Chefiteers.